On October 10th, 1985, following a fatal heart attack, Orson Welles, one of the great American geniuses, was found dead, collapsed over his typewriter. He left behind countless innovations in radio drama, theater, and especially film. And yet most remarkable of Orson Welles' legacy is his brilliant leadership in arguably the greatest, most influential film of all time, Citizen Kane, which renewed the drive in filmmakers to further change and innovate the art of cinema. And though later in his career there would be many hardships, Orson never quit, making his legacy's growth one that will never end. George Orson Welles was born May 6, 1915 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and was proclaimed as a genius by the time he was 3, being a prodigy of music, art, and literature.
I was spoiled in a very strange way as a child, because everybody told me from the moment I was able to hear that I was absolutely marvelous. I didn't know what was ahead of me.
However, with Orson's parents both passed when he was only 15, his childhood was naturally short-lived. Yet this didn't stop him from becoming a household name of Broadway, radio drama, and eventually Hollywood. Welles and his company, the Mercury Theatre, created some of the most important Shakespearean productions ever to hit the stage, and they also forever changed radio drama. Yet Orson Welles was about to beat it all with the unforgettable radio broadcasts that fooled its listeners across the nation, and to truly believing that a Martian attack was actually occurring.
Instead of doing a straightforward narrative, they treated the story as if it was really happening and told it through a series of radio news broadcasts.
People tuned in at precisely the moment when there were these news bulletins, and they heard the news bulletins, of course, thought that they were realistic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing
The War of the Worlds broadcast not only gave Orson Welles nationwide popularity, but also an unprecedented carte blanche Hollywood contract that offered complete control over 2 films. This was offered because George Schaefer, the executive of Hollywood studio RKO, hoped to bring something new to a struggling company, and this amount of control was exactly what Orson Welles was waiting for.
It gave him full creative control over his work, both script, writing, acting, final cut, and it made Welles the envy of everybody else in Hollywood.
The Hollywood he arrived at was one controlled by large studios that were not interested in originality in art. At the time, each studio had its own particular style of narrative and look, but this was all about to change, greatly due to Orson's leadership through his desire to stray from the common camera work, story structure, and numerous other conventions of the time. And he would do this through his first feature film, Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is a journey through the labyrinth life of a powerful American figure, Charles Foster Kane. Kane's story is uniquely told through a reporter's unchronological search of the meaning of Kane's dying word, Rosebud. Cinematographer Greg Toland and others who were hungry to renovate cinema began to collaborate with Welles. They started shooting in July of 1940, and although Welles was mostly a first-time director, the young youth seemed unstoppable, while he pioneered in countless innovations, such as the use of deep focus, which is a technique that both the background and the foreground are in focus. Also, the use of an optical printer and flyby scenery, which helped Welles achieve shots that seemed impossible to accomplish at the time. Moreover, the film's narrative structure was greatly unique.
Through this idea of non-linear narration and multiple subjectivities, right? Working from different perspectives.
There's a way the story is told. There's a weight to the story that I think is very different than a lot of movies that came before.
Welles also used fast cutting, unique ways to record audio, set design with its use of ceilings, and so many other innovations that make Citizen Kane arguably the single most important film of all time.
I didn't know what you couldn't do. I didn't deliberately set out to invent anything. It just seemed to me, why not?
Yet Welles' masterpiece of artistic ingenuity was almost lost forever. This problem started with Orson's ego, when he and writer Herman J. Mankiewicz decided to base Citizen Kane's story off the life of William Randolph Hearst.
He controlled a good deal of the popular press In those days, the print media was much more popular than it is now.
The character of Susan Alexander was based, many thought, on Marion Davies, who was Hearst's mistress.
Citizen Kane depicts Marion Davies, Hearst's lover, in a heavily offensive way, and one that is far from the real personality.
I'm not going to stop it.
Right now.
You never gave me anything in your whole life.
I thought we were very unfair to Marion Davies, and I anticipated the trouble from Hearst for that reason.
He didn't make friends with that movie. He made some very powerful enemies, and I think that really hurt him.
And consequently, Wells' enemies were about to take revenge.
It was barred from playing a number of theaters.
Would not run in the papers, would not do advertising for it.
With the help of close friends and employees that were also appalled by Citizen Kane, Hearst fought to get it destroyed. One of their attempts was through pressuring the major Hollywood studio executives at the time to support their cause. One way by offering RKO $800,000 for Citizen Kane's negative in hopes of burning it.
Hearst was so vindictive that Wells in many ways never quite recovered from the damage that Hearst inflicted upon him. In many ways destroyed his career and his entire life. He was fighting through the problems.
Yet due to Orson's exceptional ability to lead and communicate, he was able to get the film released.
He was able to take on someone who was that influential and push through and be able to get his film shown in spite of the blockade.
Anybody, I think, with less of a strength of courage and strength of vision would have folded under all the pressure he was under. I think that made him stronger in many ways, and he never quit.
And clearly, Wells was the one who won the battle after seeing that Citizen Kane recently screened at Hearst Castle in March of 2015. Alas, majorly due to Hearst, Citizen Kane did not return an impressive profit. But because of Wells' stubbornness and leadership genius, Kane lives on and is widely accepted as the single greatest film of all time. And more importantly, every generation of filmmakers following its release were inspired to break the rules in their pictures as well. Nonetheless, because of RKO's disappointment in Kane's box office success, the studio would not be as lenient on Wells' next project.
It sort of clouded his relationship to RKO in terms of his ability to get flexibility on the Magnificent Ambersons.
Which was destroyed when the studio reshot and re-edited Wells' second masterpiece.
That sort of broke the magic that Wells' contract had. The picture doesn't work, they'll cut it and they'll let you sue them.
So they destroyed Ambersons, and the picture itself destroyed me. I didn't get a job as a director for years afterwards.
The studio's thinking of selling tickets and selling popcorn. Orson Welles is thinking about making art, telling a story, having a very strong point of view.
The Magnificent Ambersons and Wells' trouble with his last projects at RKO clearly meant the end of his contract, and his trouble with Hollywood studios would continue to the end of his life, greatly because of a fabricated reputation that Wells had of being difficult, arrogant, and careless with money. His negative status in Hollywood forced Orson to become an exile in Europe, yet he would nonetheless continue to make films all around the world. Forced to become an independent filmmaker, Wells often had no choice but to subsidize his films with his own money in order to protect his artistic control. Self-sacrificing and in love with filmmaking, Orson Welles always continued to be creative, even though he had countless uncompleted film projects when he died, and was always struggling financially. His legacy of inventive and original films changed cinema permanently.
Orson Welles inspired more would-be directors than any other filmmaker since D.W. Griffith.
And also with Wells' centennial being this year on May 6th, countless events are currently occurring to honor Orson Welles. In addition, his last film, The Other Side of the Wind, is to be released this year. Clearly, Orson Welles left behind an unparalleled legacy on radio drama, theater, and especially filmmaking. However, on the night of October 10th, 1985, when Welles died of a heart attack, he ultimately demonstrated what it means to be a leader. When Welles passed away, he was writing a screenplay on his typewriter for a movie that he knew would probably never see the light of day. However, that never stopped him from continuing to be creative. Like Charles Foster Kane's last word, Rosebud, the typewriter proves to be Orson Welles' Rosebud because it confirms and defines who the genius was. An artist who remained persistent and devoted to his love of movie making, which has impacted every filmmaker following him to embrace the courage to revolutionize film and art.